Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Good morning. Today we're going to look at planning for Key Stage 3, but pushing into Key Stage 4, science. So I won't be doing it in the order of how things are done, but I'll be looking at the section and then their subsections and what we are covering for the academic year. So you've got some idea of what's going on. So we've done aims and things of Key Stage 3 before with the idea of mathematics, looking at the national curriculum. We're doing the same thing again, but with science. So this year we are not necessarily following the national curriculum in the order in which it's written. We may not follow it at all, but this is the way that we're going to do it for this academic year of 2024 to 2025. If my daughter was going into school, she would be going into secondary school, or what we call up north high school. So this is where I'm looking at how we plan things and what we necessarily do in that regard. So I know what her previous knowledge is, so I know that she's got some revision, and I know that she has some adaptations that are needed. So we're going to start with her adaptations needed. And it's not like these are things that I have to go out and purchase. It's things we already own, like she needs a pink overlay, which we already have if I'm printing anything on white paper. But for her, we tend not to print on white paper. We tend to print on something like yellow or blue, just to make sure that she's able to read it without necessarily it being an issue. We've put in mum's trips and days and works off into our calendar, so I don't need to put it into here, and it's also on our maths curriculum, so we don't need to put it anywhere else. In here, we do have some trips that we have organized. Then we need to look at resources. We are looking at then online resources. Most of these I have already looked at, plugged into her system, so she knows exactly what she will be doing for that period of time. Over here, I'm going to move everything across one. And we're going to look at the actual topics that she will be studying, and I'll plug those in as we go. So I'm going to put our topics on our left-hand side, just so it's easier to read, especially if I am contacted by the local authority to know what we're doing for the academic year, because they tend to want to know what children are doing for GCSE and Key Stage 3, and are less likely to bother you during primary school or primary education. So we're looking at the topics, and then I will plug in her previous knowledge as we go, such as my children have been trained. One of the topics for life processes and living things is the use of a microscope. Also, life processes in cells and specialist cells. She already knows all of that, and that's because she covered it at the same time when her sister covered it. So I don't particularly need to teach that. So we have the microscope. She is able to name all of the parts of the microscope, both light and electron microscope, because she has had the privilege of seeing both. So we have the microscope going on here, and we are going to take some trips, and a few of them are going to be down south to London to things like the Science Museum and doing their home education days in London, which all of my kids will partake in, but I would choose things that are curriculum relevant for her in order for her to get the best out of the day. Sometimes she may not be booked into workshops on that particular day, but she will be booked into other things. So we'll be doing Science Museum, home education visits. That's already all booked in, and we know what's going on there. The home education days for the Science Museum in London are currently, as it stands, Thursday the 5th of September, but then also Tuesday the 7th of January. We will be doing more than likely the latter one, not the first one, because I'd like her to cover some other things first. And the same thing with her brothers. We like to get the academic year on its way before we think about doing any of the major trips. But we do have a trip for habitats, which is in September, which I've organized. And then we have, so that's to our local museum. And then we have 2 of those. So those are booked in at different times. And she knows about those. And then to look at habitats again, just a bit in more depth, we will be looking at things like, we have something here called Tropical World. So we'll be looking at hotter versus colder climates. That particular part of her topic comes under this idea of life processes. So the main section of it is processes, life processes, and living things. But the subsection that we're going to cover first, because we've got humans as organisms down, green plants as organisms, we're going to look at, so we're looking at green plants as organisms, because she is quite okay with the animal cell, but the plant cell we haven't covered in as much depth. So we will be doing things like the photosynthesis experiment, plant nutrition, all of that good stuff. But the main thing that I need her, that says green plants, that would be great, typo. Green plants as organisms. So we'll be looking at that also. The resources that I'll be using, I have a stack of resources, so I will plug those in later. So we are using Grinstar's New Star Science. We are also using Collins Science Key Stage 3 and 4 workbooks. We are using, excuse me, Exploring Science 7, 8, and 9. Physical Processes as a workbook. The Collins Science, 2 Collins Science workbooks that come with DVDs. So she will have a plethora of books that she can plug into, that I will put bookmarks in on the particular section that she needs. So when we look at green plants as organisms, there's subsections to that also. So this would be essentially term 1. We run in 6 terms. So this is our term 1. And our terms don't necessarily run alongside school terms. We run 3 weeks on, a week off, 3 weeks on, a week off. And even though sometimes the Science Museum says that their home ed days are for key stages 1 and 2, they have some bits in there which are applicable to key stage 3 and 4, which we will make that easier. So if you have quite a lot of things going on, I suggest you check the booking for them and see what they can accommodate. But you can also book your own visits, and they will be perfectly fine with that. We've done that before also. So for term 1, she's doing life and living processes, and that comes up in several forms. So we'll be doing things like variation, adaptation, classification of animals and plants, and then inheritance. So we'll be talking about things like dominant genes, recessive genes, classifications of plants and animals, inheritance and selective breeding, environmental and inherited variation. So Is it because someone, and then we'll be talking about the social aspects of those things and how those social aspects may hinder someone's development or also make someone's development so go faster. So sometimes with science or with anything, there's an overlap between more than one particular. Sorry, I've got loads of sneezing going on today. So you would be looking at more than one particular type of science or social science or mathematics may cross over into this. Also in term one, she's actually loves science, so we tend to get as much science in as humanly possible. So we then cover living things in their environment. Most of this will be revision for her because she's heard it before. She may not necessarily have been the child that was studying it, but she is the one who has heard it the most. She's very lucky in the way that she has the ability to glean knowledge from when someone else is being taught something, especially if she is interested in it, like the majority of us, she will go ahead and just glean the knowledge. So we have a lot of life processes and cell activity she's already gone through because she was initially interested in it. Because I have the kit and because it's not something I then need to go and purchase, the next thing we're moving on to is electricity and magnetism. We don't need to look at electricity and magnetism for a long period of time because she already knows the majority of that because we played with magnets when she was younger. We did conduction, we did insulation, along with the idea that she did a lot of fuse work, so changing plugs, working on circuit boards when the house needed a lot of repairs. So she has a lot of hands-on experience in that idea. So that will be electricity and magnetism. In electricity and magnetism, you are covering electrical circuits, measuring currents and voltage, series and parallel circuits, series circuits, magnets and electromagnets, but she's actually seen a real life electromagnet, so a large one up at the university. So she's been quite privy to a lot of things while I was up there. Term 3, because we are going to be moving into the idea of physics, she will do forces in motion, and probably her younger brother will join her on this because he is very capable of doing these sorts of things. So we have forces and motion going on in the background there. But then with that, we will also cover the notion of light and sound. So they will be doing all of the color spectrum and all of that sort of understanding. But I have kits from my older daughter that I purchased through YPO. So we've got those in boxes so that I can go back through and look at what we do have and then just fill in what we don't have. So color spectrums, how does something look? And then we have mirrors for changing light direction, all of that sort of stuff and the properties of light. So we've got all of that. Her previous knowledge is quite solid on that. So then we would move on to, I'd fill in the middle in a moment. So for term 4, I know that we will it's inevitable there that we'll be looking at the Earth and beyond. And that will be her space topic. Her space knowledge is quite solid because we've done space before. So with her space topic, we have a journey into space. So we'll be using literature to plug this gap in the idea of a living book. So living book. It's an astronaut's journey into space in his biography and autobiography, sorry, when he returned. So she'll be looking at that. but we'll also be utilizing our telescope to look at constellations and things like that on a clear night. But we would also then be using the time in which we're at the Science Museum to pick up some other wonderful and fabulous things. But there is the idea of the beautiful planet 3D, which I know she will enjoy and absolutely love because she's that sort of child. Let's move this further back up and I'll do aims and stuff afterwards. But in doing that, we also have like Antarctica 3D that she'll want to see. This is all part of the Science Museum visit, and we will be doing that. So it would also be used as a resource across more than one thing, because when you're taking a journey like that from up north to down south to go look at something like that, it's beneficial that you do it when you have the opportunity to do it. We have a science museum closer, which is located nearer to us. And for that to be nearer to us, we use it and we utilize it, and it is very useful for watching things like films, and that's the Science and Media Museum, which is located in Bradford, so it's not too far from us. And we will do what they are doing, but they are changing quite a lot of things there. And I think exhibits are changing, but we have things like sound. So when we're doing that, should light and sound kits, for instance, she'll be going here so that she can see the sound and vision project. And they have quite a lot of special exhibitions that are going on. So we also do, when we're looking at light and things like that, that tends to then spill over into the idea of included with photography, because she does study photography. We all have the privilege of having SLR cameras, so we use light to our advantage. So there's also an online exhibition that they do, which is through the lens, and that is chemistry and photography. So even though that usually comes under a physics topic, that's something you can actually just look at as your own individual resource and utilize it as such. When you are willing to utilize what you have around you, you find that there's so much more going on. If you want to do something like that, we have the Leeds City Museum, and this is where we plug in trips and things. So the Leeds City Museum, things will go across into both categories or more than one category. But Leeds City Council has a permanent fixture, which is downstairs, about adaptation. So we tend to go and have a look at that also. We can do them in groups. Sometimes we book them and we go in a group as a home ed group, and sometimes we choose to go and do something completely different. So for there, we end up going, you have lots of things that are just on at Leeds Museum, but we end up having to see and do, and we look at all sorts from there. So Leeds City Museum will be one of our normal hotspots, and that comes under our trip for variation. Take a look at your local museums and see what they have on offer and utilize them, especially if they're not going to cost you an astronomical amount of money in order to do that. Terms of electricity, magnetism, force, sound, and beyond. We will be going to the Royal Armories for that, because one of those things that we know about and it's local, that will be one of the things that we go and deal with. So for here with electricity and magnetism, we're going all over the place so I can plug in different things that we know we're going to use, because at the time when I'm planning, you're planning with me today, it's more of the idea that I need to know what I have the ability to deal with. So the Royal Armoury deals with armour and visits and all of those sorts of things, but we're going to be looking at a crossover when we look at forces, motion and sound, and that will be human organisms, because we will be looking at the human ear. And this stemmed from something she was very, very interested in, was gunfire and how gunfire would infect the inside of the human ear if it kept going on for too long. If it kept going on for too long, is a question of, does that mean that the human ear would then be exposed to a lot of unnecessary trauma to it, and then would that affect someone's hearing? So we'll be doing that also. That's something that we need to plug in as a trip here. And I will go back to that at some point. The Earth and Beyond, when we do the Home Educators Day, we will also go back to because it's local, it's one of those things that we can do several times in the year. We will go back to the National Science Museum in Bradford to be able to look at certain things in a bit more depth. From humans as organisms in term 3, we will then also look at societal impacts of things such as smoking, and we're leaving out having a baby, because that could be something that she's already aware of. And so I don't need to do that. She knows the mechanics of how that works. She's not particularly happy about it, because she's like, that doesn't sound very fair. So we're looking at fighting disease. When we look at fighting disease, we go into a bit more detail with that, with the chemical makeup of things like pain relief, or the NICE guidelines, and how that actually works, and how it's easier for us to look at symptoms and treat the symptoms rather than it is to treat the underlying condition. Sometimes I look at different topics with her outside of what she's, in quote unquote, would have covered if she was in school, because usually we get through Key Stage 3 science in a year, if that, or a year and a half, because a lot of it could be covered through actual conversations and reading stories and news articles and visiting various places. And usually for that, I keep my evidence as pictures, or as video conversation, or just general conversation with her. And I need the conversations to be as in-depth as possible. So there will be a lot of back and forth in terms of what do we need, what do we not need. So that would be also very useful in that regard. Leeds museums in general have a lot going for them. So we tend to utilize that quite a lot and take those things into account. As we'll be doing things like the human ear and smoking respiration, healthy living, and then also fighting disease, we'll be going outside of the box with that also, and visiting some places like hijama practitioners, so that we can look at things like cupping and prophetic medicine. So I need to plug that in somewhere. And holistic medicine, and why the practitioner of holistic medicine is very different So she's also going to have a conversation with our chiropractor, which we have already organized. So she's well on her way for that one. But we'll also be visiting things like a herbalist, so that we could look at how modern day medicine is derived from things that we already know or have. So also you can look at, we have books for, like, even your museum. If you look on the side of your museum, you could get some really interesting books. So there is a book that I want to purchase that we don't actually currently have. Even though my living room floor is covered in books, and I'm so glad my husband is not here this weekend, because that would be his life over with if he saw the amount of books that were on the floor. So that's why we tend to plan when he's not here. So that's usually very useful. If he's traveling, we can get our planning done. So the book that I need to purchase, and I will put that in bold because I need to purchase it, is Anatomy Exploring the Human Body. I will first and foremost try and buy it secondhand, but if I can't get it secondhand, I will go for a brand new version, because that doesn't really, in a way, affect me, because we have a budget for that, which is something I set out very early on. So we need some more books on anatomy. So we will be looking at anatomy, but we love to look at anatomy via art. So that also gets linked in with her art fixture. And then we talk about the religious part of that and not recreating various other things. But we've looked at things such as looking at the human body, and how did we come to have the knowledge on the human body that we have, and the idea of cadaver bodies and donating your body to science. We've also spoken about things such as like organ donation and how that would work. So she knows a lot about tissues and all of that sort of jazz. But we will obviously for that take a visit to Leeds Thackeray Museum. Electricity and magnetism. I still have to work out where our trips are going to be for that, because I try and do at least 1 or 2 trips for each of the topics that we're going to do. One of the other ones that I really want to do with my children this year is the planetarium. And that, there's usually a projector, and I think I have a feeling that our university Leeds University may be the place where we need to actually go. So I may need to go talk to some colleagues about finding out about a planetarium. But I know that there's a few in the UK. I know that for sure. So I will look at that. But we could also, if we wanted to, travel quite a bit, because there's one in, I know there's one in Spain. No, not in Spain, sorry. I know there's one in France. I know there's a few in London, and I know there's one near Manchester. So there's one in Newcastle, it's saying. So that's only a train ride away. So that could be pretty cool. So we could take a trip up there and find a planetarium there and just have a good old look. But there's a good look at the Science Museum, also the Bradford Science Museum. So that could be quite useful also. The planetarium website is on here also, so you just have to look it up and find what's local to you. But I know London has a few. And when we're doing adaptation and things, we will also do the home education day at the Deep, which is a submarine. So we will look at that, because her younger brother will be doing Under the Sea as part of his curriculum. So we tend to drag each other along in those sorts of things. And if we're talking the Earth and beyond, I would probably pop that in around that particular time. even though it may not coincide with when we're actually studying it, it will coincide with the fact that it's being studied, just for purposes of knowing. All of her previous knowledge, I will plug in as and when I see fit, because I know what she knows, and she will probably at some point surprise me with other random knowledge that she has. But we have the idea that we may also want to do the family sleepover at the Deep. There are quite a few. We do inclusive sleepovers and group sleepovers. I think I may book one just for the fun of it, of going. So that would be something I would love to do for our entire family, but then also to open it up to the homeschool community in terms of being there and doing that. So the Deep is one of those things that come up, and it comes up as an annual price. When we need to do materials, classifying materials and changing materials, which will be term 5 and term 6. So this is the entirety of the Key Stage 3 curriculum that we're trying to cover in a year, at a push, year and a half. We don't know what's going to come up in life, but we can always be ambitious and pull back, because my children like to surprise me and leave me in the lurch halfway through the year of having to replan because they have done the work or chosen to take their work on holiday, or looked at the idea of extending their own work, so patterns of behavior when it comes to materials. So that means she'll have to start looking at things like acid and alkalis. We've done the pH scale, so I can plug that in quite easily. So we have done the pH scale. And then we will look at the idea. She's already covered the reactions of metals with acid, the reactions of metal with alkalis. We've done all of that in what we call face-to-face group sessions. And we do that with experiments. So I have quite a lot of chemical experiment kits. So we have all of that. We'll be looking at the different variations of making salts, and chemical changes, and then reversible and irreversible reactions. We've already looked at a bit with things like water and vapor and condensing and then returning it back to what it is, but we're going to be looking at things. I will introduce her at this point to the notion of equilibria, because she's got enough knowledge to do that, which means that that will push her into way into Key Stage 4. But looking at the idea of things like burning fossil fuels, she knows, and balancing chemical equations has been brought down from Key Stage 4 to Key Stage 3. But they usually use them as word balancing rather than the actual balancing from the periodic table, which is fine by me, but I will just teach both together. When you teach classifying materials, you're looking at things like solids, liquids, gases, but I teach solid, liquids, gases, and aqueous, because usually it's the 3 states of matter. Then when you are older, you go back again and do it again, and you would have to then go back and look at aqueous solutions, and aqueous solutions come up all the way through the curricula, but it also comes up in examinations later on. If you are not a fan of CGP books, which I am not a fan of, the best thing for you to do is CGP is very good at a contents page, right? But the depth of knowledge is not always there because each individual page gives you one level or one page of knowledge and then a list of questions later on. I don't teach like that because I don't want my children to have sparse knowledge on everything. I'd rather they have in-depth knowledge on several things and perfect that before we move on. So we'll be talking about solid liquid gases, sublimation. I will include elements and reactions, looking at an actual periodic table and pulling it apart. I have a resource that I made, which when we're doing that, we will fish out of one of the boxes, and that will be part of that where she has to learn to put the periodic table together. So metals, transition metals, noble gases, all of those sorts of things will need to be put together so that when we get to Key Stage 4, hopefully within the next academic year, we hit the ground running. And I don't need to worry about that because we're hitting the ground running 2025, 2026 to hopefully sit the exam 2027 when she's 13. So that's usually that's the way we're going with that. Then we tend to use term 6 and our final term as revision. So it's anything, obviously there's pauses in between every single term to check knowledge, but this is the time where we have the scope and liberty to extend things. So we're going to look at that. So our term 6 tends to be all of this random stuff that we tend to do, but there is something that we do tend to do that not many other people tend to do, and we tend to plug in people of interest alongside as we go, and it's something I've got on my sheet in front of me, but I haven't actually put onto the board. So I'll add that in now so you guys can see what I actually mean. So I'll insert that column to the right, and we'll do it this way. It's called people of interest. And most of these tend to be either Muslim or Black scholars that are overlooked. So for when we're doing plants, living organisms and things like that, I know that I need to go through a book that I have in my arsenal of stuff, which is, I will need to look specifically at chapter 7. And because he's a botanist, we're going to be looking at Dr. L. Frederick. And the reason why we're looking at Dr. L. Frederick is he tends to scope both things. He's both a Black man, but also a man of faith. And then we look at Black women, and also how they particularly made their contributions to science. So we look at things like when we're doing the human body, there was a doctor, so we have Jenny Craig Sinkford, and she made her debut in dentistry. I'm not sure my daughter has any interest in dentistry, but we tend to cover people of interest because it gives her the idea of someone that she can essentially look up to that looks like her. So we have Jenny Ann Sinkford that we will look at, and that is chapter 6 of the book that we have. So we'll be looking at the Sinkford family plan, where she worked out that she could get her children through academia much quicker than most people would actually think. So we look at rare people and then also outstanding pragmatists or thinkers of the time, such as things like Booker T. Washington, and we will also look at George Washington Carver, who it's one of those things, it's the idea that he goes into things way before emancipation, and that's part of our legacy, our history. So the idea of standing tall, it's more of a sense of giving her the ability to look at other people and how they added to science. But we will also then go through the golden age and look at things like the telescope and how it was developed, but then who it was developed by, and also plug into the Islamic element of that. But we will be covering Islamic history this year, post-Sirah anyway, because it's a course that I will be teaching. So I will fill those in as and when I need to, and you can fill in people of interest from your own culture or your own background, because with science, that is not limited. With science, that is not something that you could say we're going to attribute to all of one set of people, but we can teach our children that there are people out there who look like them and believe like them, and also have a great hand in what they're being taught at the present moment. Great place to look for something like that is if you're looking for Muslim influences, is 1001, I believe it's called 1001 Muslim inventions. And 1001 Muslim inventions, and it's an enduring legacy of Muslim civilizations, or from Muslim civilization. There's a website. All of the stuff that I've listed that have links on this curricula will be links in the show notes page. So it's one of those things that I update frequently. So when I update things frequently, I tend to just put them in the show notes. So that is an online resource that I will be using all the way throughout, but we also have the book. So we'll be using the book all the way through also, just to make sure that we are covering all sorts of things. They also have days, and then there is a mosque in Iran that I would really love the kids to visit. And it's a mosque that has the most beautiful stained glass windows. We may do that as they get a bit older. We may do that closer to the time of now, but it's something that we will definitely be looking at. And that would be something that would be so useful for us to look at. We can't really look at science and all of the good things of science without looking at the House of Wisdom. So that will be something that we will study before we start our academic year, but then also during our academic year. So it's the idea that we can go and look at things like that, but we're definitely going to look at the House of Wisdom because it was a place where it was an intellectual powerhouse. We have to look at that, and we have to look at the scholarship that came from there, like the scribes and the mathematicians and the astronomers and the astrologists, and see how that builds on how today we are either building on or not necessarily building anything on about what we are doing. So we have books that are the House of Wisdom. We have one by Jonathan Lyons. We also have lots of different ones that we can look at, but they are linked on the page, and I will put a link down there. But they have like a fun and learning session. They have resource packs that you can look at, films and videos that you can watch. We all have that video that we've all probably watched, where the children go to the museum and they're told to look at the Dark Ages. And the man who is there is in the Library of Secrets, and he has the ability to show them that there was 1001 million inventions that happened during that period of time, and that they need to go ahead and investigate a bit further because they are missing out on things such as the Golden Age. So because it was the Dark Ages in Europe, they're only taught the Dark Ages, but they're not taught that the reason why it's dark is because there is a contrasting Golden Age going on at the same time. So we will use this time as a revision, but then also more interest-based learning. So interest-based learning, but she has scope for interest-based learning all the way through, and we'll be looking at alchemy and how that links to chemistry. So that will be very fun for her and also for the rest of the household, because we tend to look at that and have fun with it. 1001 Inventions, the link, where you go into the idea of films and videos. The films and videos element of that particular page is actually really good because it goes through many things. So you can look at things like creating your own individual posters. You can look at the posters that they have available for you to purchase, or ones that you could print. So they've got ready to print PDF ones about things that go on in your home, things that are chemistry related, things that are not chemistry related, all of that sort of stuff. All of the resources that we are going to use, I will try and link as much of it in the show notes of this particular video, and I will, if you want a copy of the PDF or the actual layout of how we're going to run our Key Stage 3 term, I will leave an email address in the chat or in the show notes, sorry, in order for you to be able to message me, because it comes with a resource pack, and the resource pack is also on sale, where I go through and I've linked all of my resources and all of the ones I've created and all of the ones I intend to create before we get into the academic year or the end of the actual Gregorian calendar year. I have a lot on my schedule that needs to be done. So with that, we're wrapping up Key Stage 3 Science. Assalamu alaikum.